משגיח מן החלום, מציץ מן החכים. ידי אחותי חדה, הריתי ברי עם בשמים. באתי Welcome, everyone, and apologies for the pooch. We can't mute her, unfortunately, when we're all here together. I'm Rabbi Nadia Gross. I'm co-founder and chief programming officer at Yahrzeit, pronouns she, her, and I am really delighted to welcome you all on this afternoon, evening of the day that we honored Reb Zalman's 10th Yahrzeit. And we chose, the Ruach Haaretz committee, planning summer programming in a summer where we're not together in person, wanted to celebrate Reb Zalman's legacy in Yahrzeit. And this is the first of a series of programs that will celebrate his legacy. But today, we build an image of the legacy that he's left with each of us through story and song. And of course, we opened with one of Reb Zalman's most beautiful pieces of music that he wrote for his Rebbe and would sing on the occasion of his Rebbe's Yahrzeit. But I actually heard it the first time at Eilat Chaim when Reb Zalman and Eve were teaching the Song of Songs. And he sang it really as a love song to his beloved Eve. So I offer it today as that love song to Hanatina and to Eve, who will lead off our stories. I'm really thrilled to invite Hanatina Schachter Duskis, who is a Vatika in the Saging Legacy program, and a very important member of our community and our faculty, and of course, one of Reb Zalman's daughters. I'd like to say maybe his favorite daughter, because she's our favorite daughter of Reb Zalman. And Hanatina is going to share with us child memories of Reb Zalman as Abba.
Thank you very much, Reb Nadia. It's wonderful being here with all of you. And today I'm remembering my father as my Abba Daddy. And I called him my Popsy Turtle, and he called me his Tientje Leben, Tina the ballerina. So my first memory of him that I want to share is the mornings in our house on 471 Inkster Boulevard when I was a young child. I was about 4 or 5, and all my siblings were getting ready to go to school, and I wasn't quite going to school. And I see my mother at the counter making sandwiches to send with the kids to school. And my father's at the stove scrambling his eggs for breakfast. And we always got a kick and a chuckle out of what he would put in his scrambled eggs. He would go to the refrigerator and he would look for anything that was left over from the day before. It could have been some canned corn, canned peas, leftover tuna fish, sardines, whatever. And he would throw that in his scrambled eggs. I guess that was not to waste food after what he went through as a young child. But we would get a chuckle out of what he would eat for breakfast. And he would, of course, drink his coffee. When he got down to the bottom 1 inch of his coffee, he would add milk and sugar for me and give me my coffee milk. And I really loved that. So Shabbos was very special. After the Shabbos meal, both in the evening and during the day, Abba would tell us misas, and we'd ask him, tell us another, and tell us another. And Shabbos lunch, after we finished the meal, he would have a basket of fruit in front of him, and he would cut it in either funny shapes or peel an orange and do it all in one piece, and then put it together and show us how it was round. And he called it Shabbos oipes. He'd pass it around the table, and we all got some, and he would tell his stories. Friday nights in the wintertime in Winnipeg, when it was too cold to walk to the Lubavitcher Shul, we would daven downstairs, and some of us kids were a little bit antsy. And so while they were doing the Amida and we were just sitting around, he had a basket full of kaleidoscopes. So we got to entertain ourselves and be quiet while the older ones were davening. And he always brought such music and lively energy to it, you know, getting up and davening and singing L'Chabadi. And it was just a delight. We always had a lot of people at our table. And sometimes we would just have quiet and just the family, and that was also very nice. My memories of the holidays are the best. No one knew how to do Chagim like my father. The ones I remember the most are going to Tashlich. Some of his students would come to our house and we'd all walk together down to the Red River in Winnipeg. And my mother's best friend, who we call Tante Esther, lived on Scotia, and in her backyard faced the Red River. So we would go there, and she would always have wonderful treats for everyone to eat. And from there, we would go to this public park and do Tashlich. And Tashlich was not only a time that my father had these almost like parades down the streets in Winnipeg. Simchas Torah was a blast. After the davening, he would take out the Torah and we would do shul hopping. We would go first to Rosh Pina shul, and there'd be tons of his students. We'd be singing in the streets, dancing in the streets, and we'd get to the Rosh Pina, and then others would join us, and we'd go to the next shul. And more people would join us, and we'd end up at the Talmud Torah Beth Jacob shul, and it was just so much fun. Of course, Purim was great. My father always put on the voices when he was doing the parts of the different people, and I'm glad that he has recorded one. So if you ever want to listen to it, it's wonderful. Pesach we had from one end of the house in the living room to the other end, table after table, 40 people, stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning, and we kids just had a blast. The one stands out the most for me, actually there's two. One is 1964, I was 9 years old, and we had for the first time 1 priest and 3 nuns. And me and my brothers we just had a blast. The other one was 1966. We drove to Chicago where my Aunt Devorah and my Uncle Joseph, his brother and sister, lived, and my grandparents came in, and another uncle and aunt from California. And we were all together for the first time and the last time for the special reunion for Pesach, except for my brother Shalom. And we have a photograph, and my aunt photoshopped him in, cut out a picture and put him between two of the people so that he would be in the photo. Innovations. My father was a very innovative man, as we all know. I remember him taking out the sewing machine. This is in the very early 1960s. And he would take his white t-shirt undershirts, cut up the side, and make a little attachment to put his tzitzit on. And you see them all over the place now, the comfortable t-shirt undershirts. Something he never patented, but he made for himself. Also Shabbos robes. And he took an old record player once and he turned it into a spin art for us. And it was so much fun. So he always had these ideas, and he was a tinkerer and coming up with different things. Summer adventures. We looked forward to the summer. Every summer we had a different adventure. Several years in a row, we went to Camp Ramah in Wisconsin. And one year, I remember in particular, I was 10 years old, so it must have been in 1965. He did a 10-day retreat at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. And we were at this nice hotel where they had fancy buffets. Every meal they had a different ice sculpture, and they had a pool and horseback riding. We just had a wonderful time as kids. And on the way home, we stopped by Mount Rushmore. And we loved long car rides, because in the car rides, we had Abba all to ourselves. And we really enjoyed that. We played geography. And as a grandfather, he would come to us when we lived in Atlanta, Georgia, on his way to Gainesville, where he would teach with Bahira and Reb Shaya. And he would always fix the kids' bikes. That was his thing to do. And for me, he would always gather up my knives and sharpen them. That's the Schechter in him. He would come to all of the kids' brises and bar mitzvahs as much as he could. And then in 1960s, when he turned 60, and he took the retreat where he came up with aging to saging, he called us all and said he didn't have the energy to come to every grandchild simcha. He was only going to be able to come to the children's simchas. And he had done 3 out of 4 bar mitzvahs for us. And the last one, my brother Shalom, who was a Jewish renewal rabbi, stepped in and did it. And God willing, I'm going to see him next week. He's coming to the wedding. So that's what I wanted to share about my Abba Daddy. And I'm so grateful that he's left behind all of his books and YouTubes and his special students and friends that I can share my Abba with the world. As a child, I just wanted to keep him to myself. But now I see the greatness, and I want to help spread that through saging. Thank you. Vivarti.
Shamanu. Thank you so much, Hanatina, and you are spreading his greatness. And so I started by saying there are 2 beloveds here, 2 special beloveds with us this evening. And the second, of course, is his beloved wife and widow, Rebbitzin Eve Ilson, rabbinic pastor Rebbitzin Eve Ilson. And Eve, I believe, is going to share with us her earliest encounter with Reb Zalman. You need to unmute yourself, Eve.
Can you hear me now? You still can't hear me?
Yeah, no, yes, we hear you. We do hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. So my mother divorced when I was quite young and remarried when I was already out of college. And who did she marry? A rabbi. And this rabbi, Oliver Sholem, Sam Penner, told me, wait for anything Shlomo or Zalman are doing. You would like that kind of stuff. I don't think any of us had any idea how much I would like that kind of stuff. And I first met Zalman when I was doing graduate work in the Bay Area, and he was being invited by the Aquarian Minyan. That already says a lot. They just had an event, they had a reunion, they had a death. These people have stayed together all these years, and they're quite wonderful. And that was how I first met Zalman. What I was remembering, what really impressed me in the beginning, was it still in Berkeley? It was Yom Kippur, and it was afternoon. You know that time of day on Yom Kippur when everybody's got low blood sugar and nobody's really particularly perky. And there we were, and he looks out the window and says, "Oi, kinderlach, you're about to have a real treat." And we all turn and look out the big window. It's a wall window. And coming slowly down the path and towards the stairs is this tall, beautiful woman in a long black embroidered Palestinian dress with long dark hair. And she is accompanying this man who looks like an apple doll. He comes maybe up to about here on her, and he's wearing a white galabia and a white headdress, and he's got a little beard, and it is Sheikh Sidi Hassan. And it's the afternoon of Yom Kippur, low blood sugar, and Zalman looks out and says, "Oi, kinderlach, you're about to have a real treat." Everybody turns and looks and goes, "Really?" And he says, "Now, listen, I know that most of you are not accustomed on Yom Kippur of addressing the Ribbon Shel Olam by the name of Allah. But I must assure you, it's the same one." And I remember hearing that and thinking, I can trust this man, he really knows. That's how I first met Zalman, many years before I met him personally. Dibarti.
Shamanu, thank you so much, Eve. And that's the Zalman we saw in future iterations, but you got him right at the start. How wonderful. So we want to do another one of Reb Zalman's pieces, and this particularly for you, Hanatina, and for you, Eve. Excuse me. A song to comfort you. Because while we've all missed Reb Zalman and we all mourned the loss of Reb Zalman, the hole that was left in your lives is so much greater. So this is Reb Zalman's Comfort You song. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you my friend, my Chevruta, Reb Simcha Raphael, and replaced Reb Simcha in this position here today because he goes way, way back with Reb Zalman as well. In fact, he was the first executive director, though apparently they didn't use that kind of language in those days, of the Pnei Or Rabbinic Fellowship or whatever it was. So Simcha has been in relationship with Reb Zalman longer than many of us here, and he's going to share with us 5 things I learned from my Rebbe.
Well, first of all, it's very exciting. Thank you very much. It's very exciting to be with such a wonderful group of folks and to have 5 minutes to share almost 50 years of being around Jewish renewal. So I've already wasted 20 seconds with that time. So this is the way I want to tell a story. Hang on. 5 things I learned from my Rebbe, and I'll tell you at the beginning, and then we'll go through. He knew how to envision the Jewish future. I'm going to talk about finding the inner dimensions of Jewish rituals. Think large, imagine making the impossible possible. I can see Tina Khan just sort of nodding, being willing to think and act out of the box beyond the old paradigm. And then I'll end with, because my time will probably run out, Kol davar b'ito, everything in its organic time. So Reb Zalman was the first Jewish teacher I ever met who talked about the Jewish future. I had been in a Hebrew day school, and my teachers were Holocaust survivors. You went to camp, I also went to camp. And they would show us their tattoo on their arm. There's one teacher who did that. And then I did a Judaic Studies undergraduate degree, and I already had a master's degree when I met him. And so I learned Bible and rabbinics and a religious history of Western civilization, but nobody talked about where are we going in the future and what kind of Judaism do we want to create. And that was really a piece of his gift, to envision and to create the future. He knew that we were going into a 21st century Judaism. I met him a quarter century before that. The first day I met him, he lit the Shabbos candles and he said, we light the inner light to remind us, we light the outer light to remind us to light the inner light. And he knew how to link ritual practices with inner spirit. And again, nobody had ever said that. You know, we knew where we could source it in halakha, and I was interested in history and where we could find it in history, but where we would find it in ourselves was really the gift that he gave to so many of us. Think large. Imagine making the impossible possible. 1981, I was working on 6723 Emlyn Street with him, helping build the basis of the organization. And that was the year of Birkat HaChama, the 28-year cycle of the blessing of the sun. And we were talking, what kind of program do you want to do? And he gets up and says, how about the Empire State Building? Azoi. And Alav Sholem, Jeff Obler ran the Martin Steinberg Center for Jewish Arts in New York in the 1980s, and he was instrumental in getting us permission to be able to do Birkat HaChama on the 57th floor of the Empire State Building. I heard a rumor that Shlomo was also on the World Trade Center, but I never knew if that was actually the case. And he released 70 balloons into the air, and he had his FM mic with him, and all the radio towers are up on the 57th floor, so he was getting all this interference from all these other radio stations that were coming in. Think large. Imagining making the impossible possible was Zalman par excellence. 4, be willing to think and act out of the box beyond the old paradigm. So I'm currently in Knoxville, Tennessee, where Reb Gila Razel and I'm going to put in a promo. Gila Razel and I is doing a Yahrzeit celebration Sunday night through Aleph. We were getting married in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he and Ilana and I believe Barya had driven down to Knoxville. And in good Southern fashion, we had a rehearsal dinner. And after the rehearsal dinner, he comes up to us and he says, I looked at an ephemeris, an astrological luach, an astrological calendar, and tomorrow at the time of your wedding, the moon is void of course. Without any long discourse on void of course, it's not a time for new beginnings. So he says, so we need to do your kinyan tonight, your preparatory rituals for the wedding. And he said, follow me. And we went up to the top of the hotel that we were in, and he opened a trap door, and we were on the roof of the hotel, which was right where the sun sphere was, this big, huge gold globe. If you've ever seen pictures of the Knoxville 1982 or 1984 World's Fair, and we gathered all of our talmidim, all of our witnesses, and he had the men walk in one circle and the women walk in another circle. We signed our kinyan documents, and then he threw the I Ching for us. And so it's stuck. And the last thing, Kol Davar B'Ito, he said, everything in its organic time. And I live by that in my life. I often repeat that to myself. He had a sense of even though he envisioned the future as a human being, and as somebody who'd been through his own experiences of trauma early in his life, he had a sense that if you wait long enough, if you wait in God's time, things do happen. So it's in God's time, it's time for me to say, thank you very much. And the neshama is on Maria. And if you have a moment at the end, we're ready to sing a Yahrzeit song.
Thank you, Simcha. Thank you, that was delicious. And now we get to hear from another friend through the decades, friend and fellow chassid. She describes herself, Mora Yehuda Spishman, who we are delighted to have here in Boulder with us and has been a teacher to Amitai and to many of us, and has known Reb Zalman across the decades, and that's what she's going to share with us.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Yeah, it's amazing. You know, sometimes I just turned 80 this year, and sometimes I've lived in several different places, and each place seems like a world in itself, kind of disconnected. So for me, Reb Zalman was like a thread of techelet going from my early years. I met him in my 20s in Worcester, Massachusetts. I was davening on Sukkot, which was my birthday, and I had a lulav of an esrog, which in those days was kind of radical for a woman, a Hasidic woman. But I look across the mechitza and I see a rainbow, and it happens to be attached to a talit. So I look up across the mechitza, and Reb Zalman is looking across the mechitza to see this woman waving a lulav and etrog, and that's how we became kind of linked in the beginning. And it didn't stop at that point. We emailed each other, and he sent me some teachings that he transcribed, Hasidic teachings, and some songs on a little cassette that he composed. And But the next time I met him was about 15 years later in a place called Mount Tremper, where there was a gathering called Ruach, where Shlomo and Zalman would be kind of the main stars there. And I won't forget that place because it was the first and last time I slept in a tent outdoors, and it was raining for 3 days. But for me, I went down to the meditation booth there, and I was sitting alone 5 o'clock in the morning, and something came and bowled me over. I had no idea what it was. And I'm sure it's because of the environment that Shlomo and Zalman created in that space that I had no exposure to before in my life. Um, yeah, so many things that happened. So I feel like our lives were parallel in a very unusual way. There were specific interactions, but I feel like there was a meta connection that both kind of moved us both out west in similar times. I was in New Mexico in Santa Fe, but then the Jewish community there was kind of petering out, and I got invited to come to Boulder, but I was never here in my life, but guess who was the first person to pick me up? Somebody drove up to the bus station in a Jeep and says, Reb Yehudis, welcome to Boulder. So that probably was the most significant factor in my deciding that this was the right place for me to be at this time. Um, during the whole process of my being here, I think that was a highlight of my connection with him, and so many things moved me about him. One time, I wrote this poem about Judith Yehudis in the story of Purim, and a story of Hanukkah rather, and I sent it to Reb Zalman. He was so moved that he translated it in Hebrew. I'm sure it must have taken him some time, and God forbid that I can't find it anymore. But I was so moved by that. And another time, the shul that I was in, I was supposed to have a chair there, a comfortable chair, and I wasn't allowed to have it. And all of a sudden, Reb Zalman appeared and provided some money for me to buy another comfortable chair. So that was, I want to say, and he introduced me to the people of Aleph that I never heard of before. But I want to say that the meta context for our connection, I feel, is based on the teaching from Pirkei Avot that the world stands on three things: Torah, Avoda, and Gemilus Chasodim, study of Torah and prayer and acts of kindness. And for me, you can read about this, but this was an Zalman was for me an embodiment of all those three areas. And like the Baal Shem Tov says, that the Baal Shem Tov came into the world to teach three loves: love of Torah, love of prayer, and love of Israel, and love of God. And I think Reb Zalman, for me and so many of us, and you, embodied all those three very important attributes. Thank you. Dibarti.
There we go. Okay, now we're unmuted. Thank you so much, Yehudis. And I want to say, I know that Reb Zalman wanted to ordain you many times. And in your humility and your commitment to Chassidut, you wouldn't accept it. But Amitai and I just noted here that you actually referred to yourself, of course quoting Reb Zalman, as Reb Yehudis. So that felt really special. Thank you. So we want to do another song from Reb Zalman. This is Reb Zalman's melody for certain verses from the psalm that we read, Psalm 27, that we say every day during the month of Elul. And I learned this years ago from a student of Reb Zalman, from Reb Miles Krasen. And then many years later, had an opportunity to sing it with Reb Zalman at a service that we held at our Siddur Churchagogue. It was It was 9/11. It was the start of Elul. It was years after the events of 9/11, but we held an ecumenical service, which Reb Zalman came to. And he and I sang this together. I didn't sing it the way he sang it. He did tell me afterwards that he liked my version, which I had not learned from him. Today we're going to try to do it closer to Reb Zalman's version because Amitai is reading the music. So let's see if we can get it right. Lecha amar libi Good enough?
Good job.
Thank you. Good enough.
That's great.
So another friend and colleague from many years, David Chernikoff, who was part of the Spiritual Eldering Institute and continues to be one of the star teachers in Saging International, and learned with Reb Zalman and explored with Reb Zalman. And he's going to share with us his story, embracing unity and diversity.
Thank you, Reb Nadia. I'm so very happy to be at this gathering with so many others who experienced the love and the joy of Reb Zalman's life and teaching. I met Reb Zalman in 1996 in the spring. He had come to Naropa University, as some of you know, in 1995, when we created something called the World Wisdom Chair. And although I had never met Reb Zalman, I'd known about him for many years because of my association with Ram Dass and because I had worked for some of Ram Dass's organizations and heard Ram Dass talk very lovingly about Reb Zalman. And then in the spring of 1996, Reb Zalman, as part of his teaching at Naropa, offered a course called Rituals for People Helpers. And as someone who had long felt that we in our culture, in our zeal to be secular and scientific, had gone way too far in tossing out meaningful rituals and rites of passage, I was delighted that he was teaching this course. And in those days, since Naropa operated on a portion of a shoestring for the most part, one of the few benefits we had as faculty members was that we could take courses at the university without paying tuition. Yeah. So I signed up for this course. After the first session, I was just delighted with the aliveness and the heart energy of Reb Zalman's teaching. So I asked his teaching assistant if I could arrange for a personal meeting with him. We did that, and I wasn't so sure why I wanted to meet with him, but I felt a really clear intuitive sense that it was something that I wanted to do. And I went in and I sat down with him, and I spoke about why I was there. And I said, Reb Zalman, I'm not so sure why I'm here, because my life looks great from the outside. I'm 46 years old, and I have a full private practice as a psychotherapist, and I love teaching half-time at Naropa. I have a wonderful wife and a beautiful daughter, and everything's great from the outside. But on the inside, I'm really struggling. There's too many people asking me for too much. It's as if everyone's looking for a good father and a kind of unconditional love, and struggling with what some people call the wound of unlove that all of us as human beings experience a version of. And I said, who am I supposed to turn to? Because I was the head of a meditation community on top of the other activities I was doing. And I said, at that moment, I had this flash, and I said, I think I'm here because I'm looking for a mentor. And Reb Zalman hadn't spoken a word up to that point other than our initial greeting. And he looked at me with the most beautiful, loving gaze. And he said, wonderful. He said, I'll take you on. Just like that, right? And then he went on to say something even more wonderful. He said, it's perfect. He said, you be the Papa, I'll be the Zaidi. Yeah? And that's where we connected. A week later, he invited me onto the board of directors of the Spiritual Eldering Institute. And after training with the Institute a couple of years later, I was hired as the director of education and training. Yeah. But the other thing I want to say about this that has to do with this theme of unity and diversity is that Reb Zalman was so brilliant in terms of what I call skillful means, that is, creative ways to teach. And the way he ended this course was so fabulous, because what he had us do, we were meeting at the Unitarian Universalist Church because Naropa didn't have enough classroom space. And we met in the assembly hall where people at the church met for coffee after their services. And he had everybody in the class bring in their personal meditation altar. And because this was Naropa and Boulder, of course, we had Jews and Christians and Buddhists and atheists and agnostics, Wiccans, you name some way of looking at life. We had people in that group. There were about 35 of us. And he had us set up these meditation tables and altars and whatever we prayed and meditated with. And then we each took a turn and went around the room and talked about what the symbols on that meditation table meant to each of us. And it was such a brilliant way to teach about unity and diversity. Not just a conceptual way to teach, but we could see that everybody in their own way was experiencing what a mentor of mine called the impulse toward wholeness. It was so clear, yeah. And that's part of what I loved about Reb Zalman. He embodied a wise understanding of the relationship between unity and diversity. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So we're painting this beautiful tapestry, picture, image of this amazing man that we all knew pieces of and had unique experiences with. And this next unique experience will be shared by my beloved Rabbi Victor Gross, who's going to speak about meeting Reb Zalman.
When I was a high school student, my conservative rabbi, who had been ordained in the mid 50s at the seminary in New York, in those days, you had a choice between becoming a Kaplanian or a Heschelian. He was a Heschelian. And so in my junior and senior year in high school, he began to read to me on Shabbos when couldn't turn on any more lights and there was only one light. He would read to me from Heschel's The Prophets. And so as a young high school student, I became a Heschelian. Little did I know that so many years later, when I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Heschel, I quoted extensively from this person I knew from his writings, but had never met him, Reb Zalman. When I got to the seminary in the late 60s, I had the opportunity of hanging out with the person who I had read. And so he became my first primary teacher, primary meaning the most important teacher. But whatever concept there was of a Rebbe, he was not to me that Rebbe. He was austere and distant, but he taught me a lot of things. So I learned that Rebbe was a difficult person to find. Jump ahead, I'm a dissatisfied, disconnect in my work as a conservative rabbi in a congregation, which I left and could no longer abide by that aspect that had trained me and educated me. So for 10 years, Nadia and I had the only independent congregation in Los Angeles, the synagogue. And when things began to be taxing as far as what to do, we began to read books on Chassidut and Kabbalah. And at a certain point, we realized that there was a common denominator, but we didn't know what it was. So we did previews of the books that were written, looking for the common denominator, and discovered that it was Reb Zalman. So Nadia began to huck and chinig me to contact this person who I had quoted in my dissertation. And I finally said I would only do it if we talk to this guy and see if he's willing to consider a paradigm shift and recognize the dual role that two people, in this case, a husband and wife, shared in the spiritual development of a community. So I called. I had to do some research to find out where the hell he was. Never heard of Boulder, Colorado. And I figured, oh, maybe he won't answer. Maybe a secretary will answer, and I'll tell Nadia, I tried. Little did I know he would answer the phone. I did not know what to say. So I sat there silent. And on the other end, there was no sound. I don't know how much time transpired, but I never felt so comfortable in extended silence in my life. Finally, he said, so what's your story? And I said, it's the same story you heard 35 years ago, only I'm 35 years late. And Reb Zalman said, nobody is ever late. Everybody arrives on time, their own time. And I remember thinking, I could really dig this dude. And the rest is an eternal history of relationship with him. And I'll just end by saying, he asked me after we came to Boulder in 2000 to study the Koritzer, one of the earliest Hasidic rabbis, except he was never a Chassid. He had a relationship with the Baal Shem Tov. He was both a student and a colleague of the Baal Shem Tov. So when I returned the Koritzer's book to Reb Zalman, he said, what did you get out of it? I said, not so much from his teachings, but of his relationship with the Baal Shem. And he said, so what? I said, well, he was a colleague and a student, and that defines our relationship. I am your student, Reb Zalman, but I'm also your colleague. He gave me a kiss and sent me on my way. Dibati.
Thank you. Shamayim. And before we hear more stories, another piece of Reb Zalman's, probably one of his most beautiful, and one that we heard him sing many, many times. It's the Purify Our Heart, V'taher Libeinu. V'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, le'avdecha be'emet, v'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, v'taher libeinu, le'avdecha be'emet. למען לא ניגע לריק, למען לא ניגע לריק, ולא נלד לבהלה, היי לבהלה. למען לא ניגע לריק, למען לא ניגע לריק, ולא נלד לבהלה. מי זה האיש ירא השם? מי זה האיש ירא השם? יערנו, יערנו, יערנו בדרך, בדרך יבחר. מי זה האיש ירא השם? מי זה האיש ירא השם? יערנו, יערנו, יערנו בדרך יבחר. למען לא ניגע לריק, למען לא ניגע לריק, ולא נלד לבהלה, היי לבהלה. למען לא ניגע לריק, למען לא ניגע לריק, ולא נלד Reb Zalman was a dreamer of dreams and an interpreter of dreams. Many of us had experience with him in that realm. And Yonit Kates wants to share the dream of Reb Yevi.
Thank you, Reb Nadia, and for everyone, thank you for your sharing. I want to begin actually with a quick moment that I just found out, literally, as in like today, that my name Yonit, which was my Hebrew given name, was actually given to me by Reb Zalman, which I did not know. So that's a really cool discovery. So I was born in Winnipeg in 1967, which is during the time when Reb Zalman was present in Winnipeg. My Aunt Sheila, who I was very close to, had been brought back from an ashram by Reb Zalman and my mother, and he had helped her to reconnect with Judaism. And I grew up going north on Shabbat and spending time at the Roses and the Laxers, and had encounters with Reb Zalman, but of course I was 5, 6, 7 years old. I didn't actually remember much of that. Fast forward about 30 years, and I was engaging in some spiritual practices, forms of meditation and energy work and so on. And I kept having this vision. And in this vision, I was sitting in a room, and I was aware it was a long time ago, an old room in a European home. And in front of me was a book. And the book was written in what was a Hebrew script, but not normal Hebrew script. And it was about the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. And I, in the meditative state, could understand some parts of what the book said, and other times I was actually writing in it. But when I'd come out of it, I'd think, I don't know what that just was. And so I phoned my mother one day and I said, you know, Mom, I keep having this dream. I didn't want to tell her about the meditation because she was sensitive to the whole ashram experience of my aunt. And so I just said, I keep having this dream, and here's what's in this dream. And she said, well, you know who you are. And I said, well, I know Kate's means Kohen Tzedek, if that's what you're referring to. And she said, no, on my side. And I said, no, I don't know what you're referring to. And she said, you're a Yevin. Reb Yevi was the scribe for the Baal Shem Tov. About a month later, my mother came to visit me, and she handed me a book. I'm not sure if it'll show up because of the filters or whatever. There. And she said, oh, you know, Reb Zalman gave this book to Sheila many years ago. It's about Reb Yevi. I thought you might like to have it. And so I opened up that book, and it was the book from my vision. It's written in Rashi script, which is why I didn't quite recognize it. And so I asked my mother, how do I get a hold of this Reb Zalman guy? Because obviously the book is coming to me for some reason, but I don't understand what's in it. So I can't read Rashi script. I don't understand it. I need someone to tell me what's in this book. And so she said, well, Neil will know. So I contacted Neil Rose, who I'd grown up in his home, and he gave me Zalman's email and phone number. And I contacted Reb Zalman. And I introduced myself. I said, I'm Sheila Cantor's niece. She was, you know, close to you. She worked at Hillel with him at the University of Manitoba. And I said, this book had come into, anyway, so he said, well, scan a few pages of the book and send it to me. And that began my relationship with him, where I would send him pages from this book, and he would call me and interpret what was in those pages. And it brought me back into Judaism and to renewal and to all of the people here. Dibarti.
Shaman, thank you. Thank you, Yonit. Reb Zalman was a big figure in our lives from that first phone call that Victor made. And we eventually moved here to Boulder, where our two younger kids were able to encounter him and get to know him. The older of those two younger kids formed a very special relationship. And Amitai is here to tell us their story. Kaddish with the Sufis.
Hello, everyone. My Rebbe taught me how to be a chassid, and then my Rebbe led me to become a Muslim. It was after my first year of graduate school, and I had had a particularly difficult beginning to a summer, a job that was exhausting, that required being on call constantly, and working with over 200 screaming high school students, and I was exhausted. Reb Zalman sent me because Reb Zalman loved giving deployments. And so he sent me to a place that was really special to him. And I knew a little bit about why it was special to him, but I didn't really know much about the place at all. It's called the Abode of the Message. And the Abode is the retreat center and sort of headquarters that was founded by his teacher and really, really dear friend, Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan, and was now led by Pir Vilayat's son, Pir Zia. And so I signed up and went there for a silent retreat, because after 200 screaming high school students, all you want is a silent retreat. And so I went, and I was, to be honest, uncomfortable, because I was already going through a very tumultuous period in my life, and didn't totally know who I was at the time, to be honest. I was really fighting with who I was. And so, but I showed up because Reb Zalman told me to go there. I went there, we were integrated into sort of the community, instructed on what would be happening while we were there. And then we went to sleep. And the next day, everything would begin. The silent retreat would begin. The next morning I woke up, we had our morning zikr, and then our meditations, which were led by Pir Zia, who I affectionately refer to as Sufi Pope. And I was, after the morning session, I returned to my room just to check my phone. We weren't really supposed to, but I checked anyway, and I checked Facebook. And the first thing that I saw when I got on Facebook was that Reb Zalman had died. And I immediately called my parents. I called my dad. To this day, I've never heard my dad sound that way. I said, "How are you?" My dad said, "Not good." And I was just in this state of shock. I didn't really know what to do with this feeling that I was having. But all of a sudden, I had this realization that I was with someone who considered Reb Zalman to be like an uncle to him. Someone who had grown up looking up to Reb Zalman. And I realized that he was in this silent retreat. He probably wasn't going to see what had happened. And I needed to get the information to him. Now, there were 100 and some odd people there, but there were some retreat kind of managers there. And so I went up to one of them and I said, "Hey, I'm really sorry to break the silence. I need to tell you, I need to get a message to Pir Zia, because someone very important to him has died, and I don't know if he knows." This person said, "Oh, okay, well, tell us who is this person?" And I said, "Well, his name was Rabbi Zalman." Before I even finished the name, this man went, "Not Reb Zalman." I didn't know any of these people, and I know most of the people in the Reb Zalman world, and I didn't know a single person there. And immediately he said, "Reb Zalman is one of our most, one of the teachers we love the most here." And so he said, "Let me get the message over to Wahab, who's Pir Zia's secretary." He said, "Let me get the message to Wahab, and Wahab will tell Pir Zia A little bit later, he came up to me, actually Wahab came up to me and said, I'm Pirzia's secretary, Wahab. I want you to, I've relayed the message to Pirzia and he wants to speak with you. So I took a little walk through the woods with Pirzia, and it was very funny walking with this man who, everyone treated with such reverence. And to me, I immediately felt this familial relationship. My whole life, Reb Zalman had been my grandfather. That's the figure he was to me. And for this man's whole life, Reb Zalman had been his uncle. That was who he was to him. And we shared this, just a couple stories back and forth talking about it. And he said, why are you here? And I said, because Reb Zalman told me to be here. And so he said, well, that's amazing. Is there some sort of, I'm going to give the news to everyone. Is there some sort of blessing or prayer that you might be able to lead everyone in? And I said, yeah, we've got something like that. And so he, at the next session, he introduced me to everyone. And he said, he first gave the news and said that Reb Zalman had passed, and then he, which there were immediate gasps. Everyone there knew who he was and loved him. And he introduced me and said, it's very serendipitous that one of Reb Zalman's students is here for some reason. And I got up and I explained to everyone what I would be doing. That this was the mourner's prayer that we say after someone has died, and I said, anyone who is observing the mourning stands. Everyone stood up, and I began reciting the Kaddish. I don't know if you know this, but most Sufis in America used to be Jews, so everyone already knew it. And everyone knew when to say Amen. Everyone knew when to say Yehesh Me'Rava. Everybody knew everything. And I don't know why he sent me there, but I'm really glad he sent me there because that's where I needed to be when it happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Amitai. So as we are coming in for a landing, something we all learned from Reb Zalman, our last guest, before I share some few closing words, is Chazan Steve Klaper, who wants to share a lullaby for Reb Zalman.
Okay. This has been great. When I met Reb Zalman about 20 years ago, he was already in the last phase of his career, right? He was often talking about attunement, right? My first conversation with him was at an Ohala conference in the early 2000s. I had just led Friday evening Kabbalat Shabbat services, and at dinner immediately following, I caught his eye from across the room and he went like this. So I went over, he said, sit down, and then he said, that was a beautiful Kabbalat Shabbat. I can see that you know how to craft the energy in the room into a lovely experience. It's because you're obviously skilled at this that I need to tell you, it's not enough. This is how Reb Zalman often gave compliments. In order to make something bigger, you have to attune yourself. You have to align yourself in both directions. You have to align yourself this way with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God, and you have to align yourself this way with the Kahal, the congregation. Only when you're really attuned in both directions can you serve as a conduit for something greater than a lovely service. Think about it. He often ended his things with, think about it. Many of you know this. When I got home, back to Detroit, I shared this with my Franciscan compatriot, Brother Al. with whom I did interfaith programs. And Brother Al listened to me and he noted, you know, what Zalman was describing, this direction and this direction, he's describing a cross. He says, I wonder if Reb Zalman knew that. I smiled at, of course he knew that. He knew a lot more. I've got a lot more stories, but I miss having somebody to check in with and see if the crazy ideas that we come up with in the interfaith world are okay, are kosher. Because there are often questions that are above my pay grade. In the spirit of attunement, I like to offer a tune, a bedtime lullaby from my Rebbe. He told me once this was his favorite version of Adon Olam. To the tune of the old traditional folk song, Shenandoah. Adon Olam, Hashem Alach, B'terem kol Yitzir Nivra, Li'et Nasa V'chefzo kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Shemo Nikra. V'yacharei kichlot hakol, Levado yimloch Dora, Vehu haya, Vehu hover, Vehu yeh, B'tifara, B'tifara. Hu echad v'yein sheni, Lehamshilo, Leachbira, B'li reishi, B'li tachlit, B'loz ve'hamisra. Hu eli v'chai go'ali, v'tzur chevli, v'yetzara, v'hu nisi umanos li, menat kosi v'yom ekra, v'yom ekra. B'yado afkid ruchi, b'yeit ishan v'yahira, V'im ruchi yeviati, Adonai li v'lo ira, Adonai li v'lo ira. Schlaf gut, Zalman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Each of our storytellers, each of you, our guests. What a beautiful way to spend this closing of the day of the 10th Yahrzeit for Reb Zalman. I've heard all of these wonderful stories of Reb Zalman's brilliance, his inspiration, all the things that he knew, the way that he knew and understood even the hidden things. The first time I met Reb Zalman face to face and he looked in my eyes, the words that came up in my head were no secrets, because he can see everything. He just knows. At some point later, I told him that I thought he was a Gilgul. He was a later incarnation of the Jose, the seer of Lublin, because that's what I saw when he looked in my eyes. He said to me, no, I'm a Gilgul of, I don't even remember which Rebbe he thought he was an incarnation of. I said to him, and this was the start of our relationship. You can think what you think. I'm telling you what I know. The relationship that I had with Reb Zalman throughout the years was often contentious because I wanted something from him that he couldn't give me. I realized after his death, I conflated him with my grandfather a little bit, and that was probably part of what it was. But there was a way that Reb Zalman, as he would say, he went as far as he could go. And we were supposed to take it beyond where he went. And I couldn't abide that. I wanted him to go farther. And he would say to me, "It's why I made you a rabbi. You can do it." And I'd say, "Nobody's going to care what I do. I'm a nobody. You have to do it for it to stick." And he would say, "I can't go any farther than I've gone." At this stage of my life, as an elder, I really get that. I really see my own limitations, and I appreciate the younger people who can see so far beyond the horizon that I see. But I couldn't accept it then. Because I wanted him to give more legitimacy to the women that he had ordained by stepping out in the Jewish world and claiming us as equal. And there was a limit to what Reb Zalman could do. So I had this one encounter with him where I went to him and I was so angry. We had been at a wedding together and he had Victor sign the ketubah, but not me. And I fought with him all the way home from that wedding. He drove us. That was a mistake to get in a car that Reb Zalman was driving down. You know, we did it coming down the mountain even. And I yelled at him from the back seat of the car all the way back home. I was so angry. You gave me smicha, but I'm not good enough to sign a document, a shtar. And later I went to his home a few days later and I continued arguing with him and fighting. Like, you don't get it. You know, you don't get what that means to me. I'm not legitimate enough for you. And in my anger, I was crying and Reb Zalman was crying. And when I was finished, Reb Zalman looked at me and he said, "But I love you." And I said, "How can you love something you don't understand?" And you know what? He continued to love me nonetheless. And I have spent these last 10 years apologizing to him in the realms beyond for not getting it and for not giving him the space and feeling the loss of the love that I couldn't really take in fully and completely. Steve, can you give us perhaps the last verse of that lullaby so that we can close on a sweet note?
בידו הפקיד רוחי, בעת אישן ויעירה, ואם רוחי גוויעתי, אדוני לי ולא יירא, ולא יירא.
So much gratitude to all of you, each of you uniquely, all beloveds of Reb Zalman, all who love Reb Zalman. Thank you so much for being with us. Yahrzeit is really proud to carry big elements of Reb Zalman's legacy. in the Saging Legacy program, spiritual eldering work that he pioneered, that we continue to carry forward and train facilitators in that work. And in our commitment, our ultimate commitment, the ground from which we grow, to deep ecumenism, to the work that inspired Victor and me so much when we learned with him in 1998 that it set us on our path as rabbis in community and in relationship with other faith traditions. I hope that you'll join us at other events this summer celebrating Reb Zalman's legacy. We'll be together on his 100th birthday on August 28th, celebrating the spiritual eldering legacy, and so much more. Just watch for our emails. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. May we all be comforted, and may Reb Zalman's memory always be a blessing in our lives.
Amen.
Amen. Neshama zal haben in Aliyah.